I wrote 7 official reports. I warned him face to face. I CC'd the CEO on every email. And he laughed at me during the March meeting in front of the entire staff. Now he's under federal investigation for 9 charges, and I'm the prosecution's star witness. They say he's looking at 25 years. Good. Because those 7 warnings I gave him. They weren't just warnings, they were evidence. And every single one is now stamped Exhibit A through G in a federal courthouse in Missouri. My name is Rachel Porter, and until 2 years ago, I believed in the system. I believed that if you did your job well, documented everything, and followed protocol, justice would prevail. At 32, I was the youngest internal audit manager at Thermexis Systems, a biotech company nestled in the suburban sprawl outside Kansas City. I'd worked my way up from junior analyst, spending weekends studying for my CPA while my friends were out drinking. I was proud of what I'd built, a reputation for being thorough, fair, and incorruptible. Kenneth Dorson changed all that. The first time I met Ken, he was holding court in the executive conference room, his Armani suit catching the morning light as he gestured wildly about synergistic financial restructuring. He was our new VP of Finance, brought in from some hedge fund in New York with promises to revolutionize our fiscal infrastructure. The other executives hung on his every word. I sat in the back, taking notes, watching how his smile never quite reached his eyes. "And this must be our internal audit team," he said when his gaze finally landed on me. The way he said internal audit made it sound like something you'd scrape off your shoe. "Rachel, right? I've heard you're quite meticulous." Meticulous. In his mouth, it sounded like an insult. Over the next 6 months, I watched Ken transform our finance department. New systems, new vendors. New processes that somehow always required his personal approval. The old-timers who questioned him found themselves reassigned or retired. The yes-men multiplied like cancer cells. I kept doing my job, running audits, filing reports, following the money. And that's when I started finding the cracks. It began small. Discrepancies in contractor payments that didn't match approved budgets. Invoices from companies I couldn't verify. Wire transfers that took scenic routes through accounts that shouldn't exist. Each time, I documented everything. Each time, I submitted my findings through proper channels. Each time, Ken would schedule a meeting, flash that practiced smile, and explain it all away with corporate buzzwords and barely veiled condescension. "Rachel, you need to understand the bigger picture," he'd say, leaning back in his leather chair like a king on his throne. "This isn't some mom-and-pop shop. We're playing in the big leagues now." But I knew bullshit when I smelled it. And Thermexis Systems was starting to reek. By December, I'd submitted 4 separate reports flagging suspicious transactions. By February, that number had climbed to 6. Each report was more detailed than the last, each one copying higher up the chain of command: the CFO, the CEO, the board of directors. Silence. Then came that March meeting, the quarterly all-hands where Ken was supposed to present our record-breaking financial performance. I sat 3 rows back. My 7th report, 47 pages detailing what I was now certain was a massive embezzlement scheme, freshly delivered to every board member's inbox that morning. Ken stood at the podium, clicking through slides showing hockey stick growth curves and impossible profit margins. Then he paused, that shark smile spreading across his face. "Before we continue," he said, "I want to address some concerns that have been raised by our vigilant internal audit team." He looked directly at me. "Some people seem to think they found irregularities in our financial processes. Let me be clear. The only irregularity here is an auditor who doesn't understand modern financial instruments." The room laughed. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to make my cheeks burn. Enough to make my hands shake as I gripped my pen. "Perhaps," Ken continued, his voice dripping with false concern, "some people should spend less time playing detective and more time learning how business actually works in the 21st century." I didn't smile. I didn't look away. I just stared at him, memorizing every detail of his smug face, filing it away with all the other evidence I'd been collecting. Because Kenneth Dorson had just made a critical mistake. He'd dismissed me publicly. He'd humiliated me in front of my colleagues. He'd turned me from a potential problem into an enemy. And unlike Ken, I knew exactly how business worked in the 21st century. I knew about whistleblower protections. I knew about federal investigations. I knew about forensic accounting and paper trails and how men like Ken always got too greedy. Most importantly, I knew how to wait. The psychological warfare started the Monday after the March meeting. My computer access was upgraded for security purposes, which somehow meant I could no longer access half the financial databases I needed for my job. ET claimed it was a glitch. The glitch lasted 3 weeks. Then came the isolation. Email chains I should have been on mysteriously forgot to include me. The audit team's weekly meetings were rescheduled to times when I had conflicts that appeared on my calendar minutes before the original meeting time. My office phone developed a strange habit of dropping calls from external numbers. "You're being paranoid," my supervisor, Mark, told me when I brought it up. But I noticed he wouldn't meet my eyes, and his hands shook slightly as he shuffled papers on his desk. Mark had 2 kids in college and a mortgage he'd refinanced twice. He couldn't afford to be brave. The real escalation came when Jennifer was fired. Sweet Jennifer from Accounts Payable, who'd warned me to be careful. The official reason was performance issues, which was laughable. She'd won Employee of the Quarter just 2 months prior. I watched security escort her out, her personal items in a banker's box, tears streaming down her face. She caught my eye as she passed my office and mouthed one word, "Run." But I didn't run. I evolved. That night, I met with my cousin David, a criminal defense attorney who'd spent 5 years as a federal prosecutor. We sat in his home office, surrounded by law books and takeout containers, as I laid out everything I'd found. "Jesus, Rachel," he said after 3 hours of reviewing my documents. "This isn't just fraud, this is RICO territory. Mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering." He pulled off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "You need to stop playing detective and start playing chess." "What do you mean?" "You've been fighting this internally, following corporate protocols. But Ken owns those protocols now. You need external leverage." He pulled out a legal pad and started writing. "Document everything, not just the financial crimes, but the retaliation, every changed meeting, every denied access, every hostile action. Build a parallel case for whistleblower retaliation. And then we go federal, FBI, IRS, SEC, the whole alphabet soup. But first, you need to protect yourself." I started recording everything, every conversation, every meeting, every interaction. I bought a dozen USB drives and scattered copies of my evidence across safety deposit boxes in 3 different banks. I uploaded encrypted files to cloud servers in countries with strong privacy laws. I even mailed a copy to my aunt in Oregon with instructions not to open it unless something happened to me. The paranoia was exhausting, but it kept me sharp. When my car developed mysterious engine problems twice in 1 week, I started taking different routes home. When my apartment was randomly selected for maintenance inspection while I was at work, I installed hidden cameras. When Ken himself started showing up near my office for no apparent reason, always with that predatory smile, I made sure I was never alone. "How's that investigation going, Rachel?" he asked one afternoon, leaning against my doorframe like he owned the place. Which, in a way, he did. "Still finding irregularities in those scary vendor payments?" "Just doing my job." "Ken," I replied, not looking up from my screen. "Your job," he repeated, savoring the words. "You know, I've been reviewing our department structure. Seems like we might have some redundancies in internal audit, might need to make some adjustments." The threat wasn't subtle, but then again, Ken had stopped being subtle after that March meeting. He thought he'd won. That public humiliation had broken me. He couldn't see that every threat, every act of intimidation, was just another piece of evidence I was collecting. I worked late that night, officially catching up on the mindless busy work they'd relegated me to. Unofficially, I was copying files from Ken's shared drive, files he thought were protected but had forgotten to restrict when I still had elevated access months ago. Financial projections that didn't match public filings, emails discussing special projects with dollar amounts that made my stomach turn. At 9 p.m., the building was nearly empty. I was printing documents when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps that stopped right outside my office. My hand moved to my phone, finger hovering over 911. The footsteps continued past, but the message was clear: you're being watched. I gathered my papers, shut down my computer, and prepared to leave. In my bag, next to the printed evidence, was a can of pepper spray and a voice recorder that had been running for the last 6 hours. I wasn't just an auditor anymore. I was a survivor gathering ammunition for a war that Ken had started, but I was determined to finish. Walking to my car that night, I thought about Jennifer's tearful exit, about Tom from purchasing who'd vanished without a trace, about all the good people who'd been crushed under Ken's designer shoes. They'd been isolated incidents to him, individual problems to be solved. He had no idea he'd been creating witnesses, and every last one of them had my phone number. The turning point came through LinkedIn, of all places. A message from someone named Sarah Hartley. I'm an investigative journalist with the Ledger Independent. I've been looking into some interesting patterns in biotech financial reporting. Would love to discuss your expertise in internal auditing. Journalists don't randomly contact mid-level auditors for expertise. Someone had been talking. We met at a diner 40 miles outside the city, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that could strip paint. Sarah was younger than I'd expected, maybe late 20s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. I'll be honest, she said, sliding a business card across the table. A former Thermexis employee reached out to me, Tom Martinez, said you were the only person who tried to help before he was forced out. Tom from purchasing, so he hadn't just vanished, he'd been building his own case. I can't comment on internal company matters, I said carefully, aware that Missouri's recording laws wouldn't protect me if she was wired. Of course not, Sarah smiled. But hypothetically, if someone had evidence of major financial fraud at a publicly traded company, that would be of significant public interest. Hypothetically, I spent 2 hours speaking in hypotheticals while Sarah took notes. She knew exactly which questions to ask, which suggested Tom had given her more than just my name. When we parted, she handed me a burner phone. In case you ever want to discuss more hypotheticals, she said. The next phase required professional help. Through David's connections, I hired a private investigator named Marcus Webb, former FBI, specialized in financial crimes. He wasn't cheap, but when I showed him my initial findings, he agreed to defer most of his fee. If even half of this is accurate, he said, there'll be plenty of money to collect from the civil suits alone. Marcus taught me things they don't cover in CPA training: how to spot surveillance, how to conduct counter-surveillance, how to use public records to build a web of connections. Within 2 weeks, he'd discovered something I'd missed. Ken wasn't working alone. Your boy Dorson has a partner, Marcus explained, spreading photos across his desk. Remember that Panamanian company? The registered agent traces back to a law firm in Miami. That firm has some interesting clients, including one Viktor Kozlov. Russian? Ukrainian, actually. Runs a consulting firm that specializes in helping American companies optimize their Eastern European operations. Except most of those operations exist only on paper. The scope was bigger than I'd imagined. This wasn't just Ken skimming from Thermexis, this was international money laundering. I started working with my legal team in earnest. David brought in a specialist in federal whistleblower law, a woman named Patricia Chen who'd helped expose fraud at 3 Fortune 500 companies. The False Claims Act could make you a very wealthy woman, Patricia explained during our first meeting. Whistleblowers can receive up to 30% of any money the government recovers. But more importantly, it provides protection against retaliation. That protection seems to be malfunctioning, I said, thinking of my windowless office and mysteriously malfunctioning computer access. Current retaliation is actually good for our case. She smiled. Every action they take against you increases potential damages. Document everything. So I did. I created what Patricia called a retaliation diary, logging every slight, every suspicious incident, every veiled threat. The diary grew to 50 pages within a month. Meanwhile, Marcus's investigation uncovered a pattern of Ken's activities that made my blood run cold. Using public records and social media, he'd tracked Ken's history through 3 previous companies. Each one had experienced accounting irregularities shortly after Ken left. Each one had quietly settled with federal authorities for amounts that never made headlines. He's a professional, Marcus explained. Probably has 8 figures stashed offshore by now. Your company is just his latest ATM. The evidence pile grew. Sarah published her first article about troubling patterns in biotech financial reporting without naming Thermexis directly. But anyone who could read between lines knew. Ken's behavior became increasingly erratic. He started showing up at my office unannounced, asking about loyalty and team players. The smartest thing I did was remain boring. I stopped objecting in meetings. I submitted only routine reports. I became the defeated employee Ken wanted to see, while spending every evening and weekend building a federal case that would destroy him. Late one night, organizing documents in my apartment, I found myself laughing. Ken thought he'd won by relegating me to a windowless office. He had no idea he'd actually given me the perfect cover to plot his downfall. I picked up the burner phone Sarah had given me. It was time to stop playing defense. I have 47 pages of evidence, I told her, and I'm ready to go on record. But first, I need you to look into someone named Viktor Kozlov. The chess pieces were all in position. Ken just didn't know the game had already started. The Department of Justice has an online portal for whistleblower complaints. At 3 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in July, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of cold coffee and uploaded 347 pages of evidence. Bank records, email chains, forged documents, shell company registrations. Every thread I'd pulled for the past 18 months, woven into an undeniable pattern of fraud. Patricia, my whistleblower attorney, had coached me through the process. Be clinical, she'd said. No emotions, no editorializing, let the evidence speak. The submission took 3 hours. When I finally hit submit, my hands were shaking. There was no going back now. What followed was silence. Not the hostile silence I'd grown accustomed to at work, but the breathless quiet before a storm. I continued my charade at Thermexis, sitting in my windowless office, submitting bland reports that said nothing. Ken had stopped visiting, apparently satisfied that he'd broken me. The FBI first contacted me through Patricia 6 weeks later. 2 agents wanted to meet, not at the federal building, but at a nondescript office park 20 miles away. Agent Sarah Coleman and Agent James Liu looked exactly like what you'd expect. Sharp suits, sharper eyes, and the kind of neutral expressions that gave away nothing. Ms. Porter, Agent Coleman began. We've reviewed your submission. We have some questions. Some questions turned into 6 hours of detailed interrogation. They wanted everything, not just what I'd submitted, but context, connections, patterns I might have missed. Agent Liu, who specialized in financial crimes, seemed particularly interested in the offshore accounts. This Kozlov connection, he said, flipping through papers. How certain are you about the Ukrainian angle? I told them about Marcus's investigation, about the shell companies that traced back to Eastern Europe, about patterns that suggested money wasn't just being stolen, it was being laundered for purposes I couldn't identify. We're going to need you to continue working, Agent Coleman said finally. Act normal, don't change anything. Can you do that? I almost laughed. I'd been acting for months. What was a few more? They gave me a contact protocol, a specific sequence for emergencies, regular check-ins through Patricia, and strict instructions to maintain my routine. Then came the warning that chilled me. Ms. Porter, once we move on this, things will happen fast. These people might get desperate. Do you have somewhere safe you can go? I thought of my aunt in Oregon, of friends in other cities who'd offered spare rooms. Yes. The investigation proceeded with glacial patience. I learned that federal cases aren't built on emotion or urgency. They're built on meticulous documentation that can survive any legal challenge. The agents interviewed me 12 more times over 3 months, each session drilling deeper into specific transactions, specific dates, specific communications. Meanwhile, Sarah Hartley was building her own case in the media. Her articles grew bolder, connecting dots between biotech companies and offshore finance. She never named Thermexis directly, but industry insiders were starting to whisper. Ken's name began appearing in the comments sections, always quickly deleted. The pressure was showing on Ken. His perfect appearance started to crack. Wrinkled shirts, forgotten ties, the kind of details that matter when your whole image is built on superiority. He hired a personal security detail, 2 ex-military types who followed him everywhere. He was scared, good. Marcus called me one evening with news that made everything click. Kozlov isn't just money laundering, he said. He's connected to industrial espionage. 3 of the companies Ken worked for had major intellectual property theft within 2 years of his departure. Patents that ended up in Eastern European companies. The scope was staggering. Ken wasn't just stealing money, he was selling out American biotech research to the highest bidder. I shared this with my FBI handlers at our next meeting. Agent Liu's expression finally cracked, showing genuine concern. This changes things, he said. We're going to need to accelerate the timeline. October arrived with unusual heat, making my windowless office feel like a tomb. I was reviewing meaningless expense reports when Patricia called my personal cell, our emergency signal. Can you leave the building naturally in the next hour? She asked. Yes. Do it. Go straight home, pack a bag, and drive to the address I'm about to text you. Don't stop anywhere else. My heart hammered as I finished my normal routine. Computer off, desk organized. Casual goodbye to the security guard. Every step felt like walking through quicksand. As I pulled out of the parking garage, I noticed a black SUV following 3 cars behind. Ken's security, FBI surveillance, I'd never know. I just drove, following Patricia's instructions to a hotel near the airport where she was waiting with Agent Coleman. It's happening tomorrow, Coleman said without preamble. Multiple agencies, simultaneous raids. We need you somewhere safe. I spent that night in a hotel room under a false name, watching terrible movies and trying not to think about what was coming. At 6 a.m., my burner phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Check the news. But I didn't need to, because at 6:17 a.m., Patricia knocked on my door with a smile I'd never seen before. They got him, she said. They got them all. The footage was everywhere by noon. FBI agents and windbreakers swarming Thermexis headquarters. IRS criminal investigators wheeling out boxes of documents. And the image that would haunt Ken forever, him being let out in handcuffs. His Armani suit replaced by federal custody gray. That smug smile finally wiped clean. I watched from my hotel room, feeling nothing at first. Then, everything. Sarah Hartley broke the story wide, her months of careful preparation paying off in a devastating exposé. Biotech executive arrested in $47 million fraud scheme. The number made me dizzy. I'd estimated $15 million, maybe $20 million. Ken's greed had exceeded even my worst assumptions. The indictment was a work of art. 9 federal charges: wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit industrial espionage, foreign corrupt practices violations, and more. Each charge carried significant prison time. The prosecutors had built on my foundation but gone so much further, uncovering tentacles of corruption I'd only glimpsed. Viktor Kozlov was arrested the same morning in Miami, trying to board a private jet to Cyprus. 14 other co-conspirators were rounded up across 5 states. The investigation had been massive, involving FBI, IRS, SEC, and even the NSA due to the international espionage angle. Patricia kept me sequestered for a week while the initial chaos settled. During that time, I learned what 3 months of federal investigation had uncovered. Ken hadn't just been stealing from Thermexis, he'd built an entire network for funneling corporate secrets to foreign competitors. The biotech research he'd sold could have revolutionized cancer treatment. Instead, it was being weaponized for profit. When I finally returned to Kansas City, Thermexis was in chaos. The board had fired half the executive team. Federal monitors were embedded in every department. The stock price had cratered. But among the regular employees, the ones Ken had terrorized and marginalized, there was something like relief. Jennifer called me the day I got back. "I've been following the news," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. I know it was you." The trial preparation consumed the next year. As the prosecution's star witness, I spent countless hours with federal attorneys reviewing every document, every conversation, every moment of those 18 months. They prepared me for cross-examination, for character assassination, for every dirty trick Ken's high-powered defense team might deploy. Ken's lawyers tried everything. They claimed I was a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. They suggested I'd fabricated evidence. They even tried to paint me as part of the conspiracy, arguing I'd only turned whistleblower when I wasn't getting a big enough cut. None of it stuck. The evidence was too overwhelming, the paper trail too clear. My recordings of Ken's threats and admissions were particularly damaging. In one, he'd actually bragged about his offshore accounts, thinking he was intimidating me. Instead, he'd been confessing. The trial lasted 6 weeks. I testified for 3 days, walking the jury through each fraudulent transaction, each shell company, each forged document. Ken watched from the defense table, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. During cross-examination, his lawyer tried to break me with rapid-fire questions about minor discrepancies. "Ms. Porter, you claim this invoice was fraudulent, but isn't it true you didn't personally verify?" "I verified everything," I interrupted, something Patricia had told me never to do. But I was done being polite. "Every invoice, every vendor, every transaction, I have the documentation. Would you like me to walk through it again?" The jury deliberated for just 8 hours, guilty on all counts. At sentencing, Ken finally spoke, delivering a prepared statement about misunderstandings and aggressive business practices. The judge wasn't impressed. Federal sentencing guidelines are complex, but the espionage charges added significant time. When the judge read out the sentence, 25 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole, Ken's legs actually buckled. I was sitting in the gallery, surrounded by former Thermexis employees who'd come to witness justice. Jennifer squeezed my hand. Tom Martinez nodded from across the aisle. We'd all paid a price for Ken's greed, but we'd survived. As they led Ken away, he turned to look at me one last time. The hatred in his eyes was pure, undiluted. But behind it, I saw something else: disbelief. He still couldn't understand how a meticulous internal auditor had brought down his empire. The federal government recovered $32 million from Ken's various accounts. Under the False Claims Act, my share came to $9.6 million. After taxes and legal fees, I was left with enough to never worry about money again. But that wasn't why I'd done it. I'd done it because Ken had laughed at me in that March meeting, because he'd destroyed good people's careers, because he'd betrayed his country for profit, because someone had to stop him. And I was the only one in a position to do it. Viktor Kozlov was convicted 6 months later, receiving 18 years. The other conspirators fell like dominoes, most taking plea deals. The biotech secrets Ken had sold were recovered, though the damage to American competitiveness was real and lasting. Ken would serve his time in a federal facility in Colorado, far from the luxury he'd grown accustomed to. Every day for 25 years, he'd have time to think about those 7 warnings he'd ignored. I left Kansas City on a gray December morning, my car packed with only the essentials. Thermexis Systems was behind me, along with the windowless office, the hostile meetings, and the constant fear. The GPS showed 8 hours to my destination. a small college town in the mountains of North Carolina, where I'd accepted a position as financial director for a nonprofit focused on rural healthcare. The salary was a third of what I'd made at Thermexis. I couldn't have cared less. My new office had windows overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. My colleagues were earnest people doing meaningful work, helping communities that corporate America had forgotten. There were no Armani suits, no power plays, no shell companies hidden in offshore havens, just honest work for honest purposes. I'd turn down every interview request, every book deal, every opportunity to monetize my story. 60 Minutes called 3 times. Netflix wanted to buy the rights. I said no to all of it. This wasn't a story to be packaged and sold. It was a lesson, and lessons lose their power when they become entertainment. The other whistleblowers and I stayed in touch. Jennifer landed at a credit union, helping small businesses secure loans. Tom Martinez started his own consulting firm, specializing in fraud prevention. We met for dinner once a year, never talking about Ken or Thermexis, just celebrating the lives we'd rebuilt. Marcus, the private investigator, sent me a news clipping on the 2-year anniversary of Ken's sentencing. It was a small item from the prison newsletter. Ken was teaching financial literacy classes to other inmates. Marcus had written in the margin, "Even sociopaths need hobbies." I threw it away without reading past the headline. The money from the whistleblower settlement sat mostly untouched in index funds and treasury bonds. I used some to pay off my parents' mortgage, set up college funds for my nieces, and made anonymous donations to organizations fighting corporate corruption. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ken's stolen millions were now funding the very forces that had brought him down. On quiet evenings, I sometimes thought about those 7 warnings. 7 chances for Ken to choose differently. 7 moments when greed won over wisdom. Part of me wondered if I should have tried harder, pushed more forcefully, found some way to make him listen. But that was magical thinking. Men like Ken don't listen because they can't imagine being wrong. 3 years after the trial, I received a letter forwarded through my attorney. Ken's handwriting was still perfect, even from federal prison. Ms. Porter, I hope this letter finds you well. I've had considerable time to reflect on our past interactions. While I maintain my innocence regarding the criminal charges, I want you to know that I've come to understand the importance of internal controls and ethical oversight. Perhaps if circumstances had been different, we might have worked together more effectively. Sincerely, Kenneth Dorson, P.S. I heard you left the corporate world. I suppose we both did, in our own ways. I read it twice, looking for the threat hidden between the lines, the manipulation tucked into seemingly contrite words. But maybe there wasn't one. Maybe 3 years in federal prison had actually taught Ken something. Or maybe he was just playing another angle, hoping for a reduced sentence based on good behavior. I burned the letter in my fireplace, watching his perfect penmanship turn to ash. Some bridges weren't worth rebuilding, some redemptions weren't mine to grant. The truth is, I didn't bring down Ken Dorson because I was brave or noble or seeking justice. I did it because he left me no choice. He'd systematically destroyed every internal channel for addressing fraud. He'd turned the corporate structure into his personal weapon. He'd counted on good people staying silent out of fear. He'd counted wrong. These days, I sleep well in my mountain town. My work helps people who need it. My conscience is clear. And somewhere in Colorado, Ken Dorson is learning what it means to be powerless, to be ignored, to have your concerns dismissed by those with authority over you. 25 years is a long time to learn that lesson. But then again, I gave him 7 warnings. He laughed at everyone. I haven't laughed about any of this, not once. There's nothing funny about watching corruption destroy good companies and good people. But there is satisfaction, deep, profound satisfaction, in knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, the system works. Sometimes the meticulous auditor wins. Sometimes the warnings are finally heard, even if it takes federal prosecutors to amplify them. My name is Rachel Porter. I was employee number 1847 at Thermexis Systems. I wrote 7 reports that nobody wanted to read. And I put my boss in prison for 25 years. Thank you for listening to my story. I'm curious. Where are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know what corner of the world you're in. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand up to corruption in your workplace? How did you handle it? Let's discuss in the comments below.